Greetings from London and from work, like second part, PGC London. Happy New Year, everyone. And I'm sitting here.
Happy New Year. Yeah.
I'm sitting here with Kim Nordström.
Yeah.
I feel honored as well that I managed to convince you, pull you to a podcast recording.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have a good momentum, and the reason why we're here, I've read the book, and Kim, you've released the book.
Finally out.
You're among the few people who are going through the journey of starting it and finishing it and releasing it, because it's a big project, writing a book.
It's a bit more than 2 years. I estimated it to be 40% of my time. So
Wow.
give and take, a bit more than 2 years. So yeah, it was a pretty big effort.
Wow. So congratulations for, releasing. It's like the same with games, like starting the journey from the launch. And why also it's a very important topic for me and very interesting. After reading it, called Up Down, up, but really up and down of the startups, companies in games, and a lot of wisdom, learning of leadership, companies, business. Over, was it 100 companies that you interviewed?
103
Wow.
founders, CEOs, leaders. And then there was about 60 people who's been supporting on the sidelines. So
Yes.
quite a bit.
Yeah, and I feel very honored that I have been also contributing in some way.
Oh, you have. Yeah, that was great. I'm the one who's thankful here. So.
And learning also from many people that I did know or did not know directly, and through the book. And we will get into also the content of the book, but I think here, not spoiling it, because the best way to know about the book is to read the book. But some points I wanted to follow up on after reading it. And before we get started with the book, the learning, the process of writing the book as well, for people who don't know you yet or know you at all, because you've not, again, that active publicly, like you said.
I'm trying to stay away.
It will be hard publishing a book.
I know. Yeah.
But yeah, a bit about your journey in gaming, in entrepreneurial journey in gaming. What led you to write the book as well? Summary. But, also...
I mean, I grew up as one of those demo scene geeks. So I released my first game in '95. So I'm on the, I'm not on the younger side. I'm trying. But I think the book led me up. I spent one journey with King. So I did a number of years with King. And I came in just before this tremendous growth journey with Candy and all of it. And it's just an amazing number of people, culture, products. They were so good. And I did one journey, and obviously, like any other journey, there's a peak to it. And so I was through that and a bit on the downside, and then I decided I wanted to do something else. I spent 5 years with Paradox. It was a very different shift from working with King. I went to PC, hardcore audiences from very casual side. And Paradox is similar in many ways, amazing people, amazing culture. I mean, the loyalty of these fans, outstanding. Also went through an amazing journey that reached a sort of a peak and then, went into somewhat of a decline, right? And when I decided that, I wanted to take some time off, I started looking at these two journeys and realizing that they were, very different companies on the surface, but the pattern was very remarkable, similar, right? So I started thinking, what happened here? Like, so how can a company who has everything, in all aspects, do so well, and then at a certain point, and I was there, peak, right? And, in terms of audience, revenue, in whatever way, right? And things get slower and so on. So I just wanted to know what happened, because, there are consequences of actions, but where were the actions? And I thought I saw some of them, and I helped prevent some, but I really need to do. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out these two journeys. And then I started calling people and asking questions. And it turns out a lot of these companies go through similar curves. And that was the baseline for the book for me. I wasn't intending to write a book. I was just trying to learn. So I was a bit obsessed for a while. But the patterns, clearly checked out. And once I just looked outside of the games industry, you could also see that there was terms for this, like corporate life cycles. Companies go through certain phases. And it was so obvious when I started looking at it. And how could I not have seen this? And now when I talk about it, everyone's like, yeah, of course. But over all my years in the industry, no one talked about this. So that became the baseline of the book. The book is structured through these 4 phases: startup, growth, and then I call it mature, whenever the company peaks, you know, on our product or a certain level of revenue, and obviously decline. And then while doing this work, I also realized, what do you need to do even before you start a game company? So I call it the foundation. So the book is structured according to these 5 blocks. And then that's it. And then 2 years later, it's done, out, finished.
Metaphorically giving birth to your project, right? Although I wouldn't dare to say, of course, you can't give birth, but I'm sure it's a relief also to have released like the
It is.
work.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's just once I committed to actually finish the book, it becomes a discipline, and you know, you have to do a certain execution to get it done. It's super rewarding. But like any other project, you get pretty tired of it in the end. I was so tired of this text, like 85,000 words, over distributed of so many pages, and I was pretty tired of it. But so then you go in like a game. It's like the end is like you have to fix all the bugs, you have to get ready for release, all of these kind of things, and then you release it. And then it's like you can be happy and proud, but right now I'm just mainly relieved that it's done, it's out. And reception seems to be good. So.
Yes, and much more you will have as well, like through the podcast and also people reading it and feedback. So that's also will be an interesting journey post-release. And so for today, so what is really interesting is, for me, having read the book, that's also where we go a bit further than just going through the content of the book, breaking down in those phases. And the first part I understood, and also it has different focus, maybe sometimes different skills needed, different people.
For sure.
And
for sure.
What is, I find really the value of a book is, like we discussed about it, it's going back to which phase are you that is relevant for you, and looking at, you know, what should you pay attention to where many others have done the same mistake, and learning from those patterns. And before we get it anyway into like the details of some parts of it, I was curious also about the process of interviewing the companies that you, because there are, I don't know, more than 100 companies, of course, in the gaming industry, and you chose at different phases, and big ones and some that are early stage. How did you, through that process, end up selecting the companies that you selected?
So, first time doing it, in the beginning it was very organic, so I called friends, right? And it was very unofficial. And I reached a point where I realized that even if I talked to my friends, I wanted to be bigger. I wanted more data points, and it's a qualitative process. So if you ask 10 people and you ask them roughly the same questions, you look for patterns. That's as scientific as it gets. Right? But I realized I wanted a split of people. So I wanted to talk to some very successful people. I also want to talk to people who's been through, you know, the down period, and people who could reflect on their journey. I wanted to talk to people in different parts of the world, so I focused on Europe and the US and so on. I also wanted to talk to, you know, obviously this industry is very dominated by guys, but I also wanted the female perspective. So about 20% of all the quotes and the interviews been making sure that I get, you know, capture that side. So I tried to map it out. But in reality, it's also who wants to share information with me. It needs to be a good conversation. So I could probably have done extremely static, like by the numbers. But in the end, it also needed to be people who were interested, who understood the purpose, who wanted to share their journey. So I promised everyone that most of this is kind of confidential on the note side. So I can get some extra wisdom on the depth, right? And everything is in the book has been approved by everyone, or at least had a chance many times to approve it. So I hope everyone's happy with the content. But it was, I think it was roughly 3 hours in average per person, and then all the preparations, and then all the job afterwards. So how much time it takes to do it. But it was so rewarding. And I gotta say, so many people shared openly willingness of, you know, hard stuff. I asked some pretty tough questions, and I got a lot of good stuff. So I'm so much wiser now.
And that's the value of it, really going into those private conversation where maybe there's not a place for it to be public because it has many implications, right? When you have employees, you report to, I don't know, public market, investors and so on. But getting the learning and the wisdom and gathering all of that, and also with the effort of what I would call like diversity of perspective, stages, really with that effort. And it's a collaborative process because not everyone cares or would want to dedicate the time for it. So it is a selection bias, of course, in that sense for the ones that care about, look, what can we learn from, other companies that have been through the same journey. Yeah. However, like from the list, and it's in the book, you can see the source of all the companies that have participated. Yeah. I can say it was a pretty good, diverse range.
Yeah, no, but it's a good list of people.
Yeah,
it's a very good list. I'm very happy. And also, as you said, this is my take on it. And I've tried to kept it in such way that I look for patterns. The book was never about exposing any controversial. Yeah. I'd say it's rather the opposite. Yeah. It's to collect what most people already know. Many of these people in this book, including you, look at the book and it's like, yes, of course, and yes, of course, yes, of course. But once you get it into such format, you can use it more as a reference. Yeah. So a lot of people who play tested the book throughout the journey while I was writing it. I printed 50 copies and gave out while writing it. It clearly came back. It was like, this is the best part of the book. And I could know that they thought so because they could relate to that part of the book, right? And that indicated that the book will be used in that way. So if you're in the startup, you're probably going to enjoy the startup phase of the book much more than the decline part. But if you're a company where the leaders or the CEO, the founders are struggling, they're probably going to read the decline part more thoroughly and not so much the startup, which makes complete sense, right? So I'm hoping, I think Mishka said this, like it could be a book where you go back to, depending on the need, right? Yeah. And I think Joachim said, in that sense, it's like the evergreen thing, because it's a collection of wisdom, right? And obviously I colored it with my view, but I don't think it's any controversial. So also in my interviews, I wasn't looking to tell me the secret stuff that no one needs to know. I wasn't looking for that. I was just looking for, that personal journey, what happened in the good times, and what decisions was taken, and what happened then, and why, and how did you learn from that? And in many ways, like amateur psychology kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and I would really give the credit of the work of research and interview, gathering all those qualitative data points, because I have read it, it is almost a playbook. When you have to go back to those moments where, okay, this is a turning point where I will make a mistake in that phase. What has happened? And it's true that you can look into business books, but there's so much knowledge this day where you make it very focused here around games. And I think this is the main value, where I would say for anyone in the process of building a company, already in a company, it is a very straightforward resource to go to, where at least avoiding those common pitfalls.
Yeah, and I realized during the process I don't like writing. So I had this romantic view that I could spend time and write my book. But I enjoyed everything up to the actual writing. So the benefit of that, obviously I have an editor who's way better than English than I am, so my Swinglish got translated to a reasonably good English, but it's also fairly short and to the point, because I didn't like it as much as I hoped for. So it's not beautifully written, it's pretty snappy. So I'm hoping also there's depth in the statements and the sentences. So if you go back and read it again with different eyes, there might be a even deeper sense. But the chapters are short. I also acknowledge that people don't read books in the same way, and everyone's busy. So I didn't want to have 50 pages that you needed to finish. You can read through this book pretty quickly, and that was intentionally. So it could have been 3 times as thick. So I really wanted to keep it short. For my own sanity as well.
Yeah, you did achieve that outcome because it was pretty straightforward to read, and it's going back to the analogy, and it's I read philosophy, and there's some parts that are very philosophy based where it makes you reflect, right? And that's what it is for the process. Let's get into some bits of the book, however. And what I would call for me that has been the big nuggets of wisdom, and more to have like your point elaborated. So one quote that really made me smile when I was reading it, because it has nothing to do with game, but I could really understand what it covered. So I say that quote: "It takes hard work to get to success. It takes twice efforts to maintain it." From drum roll, Dr. Dre.
To Eminem. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, that's yes, there's a lot of truth, reality, where yes, if, a part of a book where you analyze the success, especially in the gaming, you see that you don't see a winner twice, very rare, or the winners that can replicate the success. So the one shot, like the question, and that's where I want to debate a bit on. Could we say it's luck? But when you do it twice or you maintain it over time, this is not luck anymore. You discard the luck factor where it's, skills.
Yeah.
So, like here, more in the general way, what are maybe the wisdom or learning you wanted to bring more around the way, maybe as companies, when we celebrate that one-shot success, and maybe you can say complacency that builds after, instead of having the wisdom of, okay, it's not over. It's not because you succeeded once that, your journey is over. So, yeah.
No, I'm with you. So I think, back to the quote, so the reason the book is called Up, Down, Up is because what I've seen is that any companies who do well, they go up, and most of them peak and they go down, and the most successful ones figured out to go through that decline phase and then go up again. So that's why this quote is in the very beginning of the book, is that it's, it is very hard to build a great studio and launch. I mean, there's just no doubt. But once you've done that game, a lot of founders and leaders start to go, what now? And the most common thing is just they go all over the place. They invest in too many things and it gets scattered. And that's usually one of the main reasons it goes down. They lose touch with what made them successful in the first time. And the typical wisdom of this journey has been, when they go through the decline phase, which is pretty good because it just sorts out the level of arrogance that comes with success, and they found their way back to what made them successful in the very first time, right? So it's a very good, to build a long-term sustainable company. That seems to be a pattern, hence the title of the book, then Up, Down, Up, right? And the scary and the most brutal thing that most people hate me for is that if you want to repeat success, you should build the same game over and over again. And obviously all the creative people hate this. That's not what they want to do. That's not why they join, whatever reasons. But it's just simply, if you want to be very skilled at anything, if you want to be a best sports player or musician or whatever, pure practice means you do the same thing over and over again, right? It's a cycle, it's an iteration. So if you build one game, you invest, you build this great team, you build technology, you build that core game, you release it, you figure out the market, you talk to the audience, and you do all of that, and then go, that was fun, I'm going to do something different now. You're essentially throwing everything out, right? Obviously the experience sits in the team, but it's a high risk thing. Right? So probability for failure is just higher. It just is. And if that's the studio profile, sure, do it. It's completely fine. But if you want to go back to whatever you measure success on, audience, revenue, whatever it is, build it again. And there's enough challenge to be, have a sustainable, successful games industry, and especially today, right? Where profitability is more important than ever, right? So you reinvest, right? There's probably a reason why sequels are made in Hollywood. Sure, it's maybe the most boring thing. But you can be really good if you actually treasure and value that and actually think about what did we do great and less so, and focus on how we can improve it, right? So, Lindsay, who's the creative person at The Sims, Maxis, she's been there for 20 years. She's building the 5th version of The Sims. And she finds an amazing, opportunity in that craft, because there's just enough challenge to go around, and there's enough space to be creative. And so, you know, I think you don't really have to go completely doing something else. You can, of course, but you have to figure this out in the beginning when you start the company, or, you know, be very clear what you want to achieve with it. Right?
And back to the beginning, I think this is really about the question you can ask yourself. And we'll get into that like really at the foundational stage. What are we building? What is the ambition? And why are we here? Because I can see the benefit for sure in persisting in the direction where you're good at. It's compound effect, right? Over time, you're just getting better. It's just unbeatable because you're just a specialist.
Right. Yeah.
But then understanding humans. There's a human part that really... I've seen this in company I've been part of as well, where it's tempting, the temptation to do something out of your way and new. And what are the patterns, back also to our observation, of the patterns you see, why people, when you tell me it makes sense, it's very rational, with a bit of discipline and wisdom, you just keep doing what you're good at. Yeah. But for some reason it's not happening. So what are the patterns of human behaviors you've seen, why it's not happening?
Well, I think you said it. I think so the boring side, the rational boring side of me is that I believe so much more in discipline than motivation. Right? And obviously, over the years, I used to be a pixel artist and a programmer back in the days when I was, 95, right? And now I'm probably more on the business side of things. So I'm probably a bit more rational. But I believe more in discipline, right? And also my own journey of writing the book, when I realized I actually didn't enjoy writing because I had this romantic view, was emotionally driven. It was discipline that made me actually finish the book, right? I think that requires a certain level of discipline, and it's just tip of the iceberg word you can throw around. But if I had to choose between motivation and discipline, I'd keep discipline any day. But like anything else, you need both.
Yeah.
So discipline in the sense of staying true to who you are, and I mean as a company, like whatever you set out to do, make sure that's what you do. If you want to change, then you need to be very outspoken of, we used to do this, and now we're going to do something different, whatever the change is, and take people through that. As you said, it is about people, and that requires discipline.
Yeah.
Right? It's self-reflection, it's measuring and understanding where you are, trying to figure out what it means, and try to figure out what change you want, and then you take people through that change, and on the other side, you keep people, including yourself, to that discipline. Right? So, I can't understand how, understate how much I believe in it, especially when you lead a company.
Yes. And it's back to your point of, you touched also on that, on responsibility when you build a company and the CEO, like the role and the discipline, which of course as a word and where there's no emotion involved, it's easy to say. But what I've seen as well, a discipline is testing for a CEO or founders, where there will be things that you do, even like against your own self, like the temptation of doing something new. But I've seen also the case of founders where they had to, by doing the same thing, this is where they have to displease others. And I can mention a company, and yes, has been actually talking about that when they were really in decline, trying to please basically employees who have been there from the beginning, loyal, and they wanted to do something else, right?
I mean, discipline shouldn't be, it's not without emotions, right? You should be empathic and emotional and care about people. But discipline is about staying true to what you promised yourself and other people, right? So in the book, Ilkka Panana is like a very great example of discipline, right? So he said, we promised the team that no one else than them can cancel their game, right? From the very beginning, 10 years later, right? And every game they've built since they became successful, a lot of people have been looking at, internally those games and development, saying this might not work, and have opinions, and it is a bumpy journey to build a game, right? And they had a lot of discussions every time about every game in development within Supercell, and these are from the early days up until now. And he said every time, I promised the team that they're the ones who's going to cancel it. And sure, they are in a financial situation so they can do that. But the enormous pressure from, peers, senior people, maybe looking at it saying, I think so, I think that, whatever, and stay true to what you promised yourself the company and the team. He essentially said every time we had those discussions and every time we came back to, if I or someone else outside the team will go in and say, we're going to cancel your game, my culture is done. Everything I promised him will be sacrificed, right? So he said, it's not worth it. And that's discipline for me. I promised you certain things, and I'm going to hold, I'm going to hold myself and you true to that. But also, if you need to change it, then you need to be outspoken and say, actually, whatever circumstances, I know what I promised. But you need to understand the consequences of that change. And I think a lot of leaders might say, it's my company, I can change it in a given time. Well, sure, fine, you have that right. But you need to understand the consequences. Right? So there's always a promise, and I think it requires discipline.
Yeah, it is exemplary for companies that have been consistent. Like the culture is when you are becoming inconsistent with that discipline, this is where it's a bit muddy, you have confusion, in where you're going, what you're doing. And I must say, like, for the case of what you, Ilka, it's almost sometimes in those situations a leap of faith. You don't know where you're going with that, but you have to stay true because that's the only reason why you exist at the beginning. So it's going beyond, the facts and having certainty. It's a leap of faith. And I think this is where it is a challenge. And we get into that topic actually as we get in the conversation about CEOs for gaming companies, where there's a big part which is, it's a lot of responsibility for a CEO to build a company, where one can say, okay, building the game, having the creative vision, but is that so? Where there's so many other things that defining in a consistent way the ways of working, aligning a team of co-founders. Why are we here? What is the ambition level? Are we aligned? And what do we do when we are not aligned? So there's so much work on that front. But also I've seen a wave of many CEOs that are CEO/product leader, game designer, and founders and everything. And so, again, some observation learnings you've had about specifically in games where it's been a challenge for creatives to be taking the role of CEO, and what it doesn't change, an organization still needs a CEO at the end of the day. And where those challenges you've seen have been?
Well, I mean, there's a few. I think, first of all, when you're a startup, maybe you're in a position where you can't really afford to be fully focused. Startup is typically, you do everything everywhere because you have to, right? There's a reason why most of them work a lot, right? You have so much to get done. But I agree, in the very top, the CEO is responsible for the alignment of all the people. So, I think you could do PowerPoint and say, here's the goals of the company and ask everyone to go after it. Of course you can, you should. But I think it's about building those behaviors and make sure that people believe in what they do and that they're going in the right direction, everyone's going there. And I think that is a daily thing, and it's a very hard thing to do. But it's part of the job to make sure that you enable people to do the things they need to do. They do it in the right order, in the right way. It's human people, it's behaviors, building patterns, all of these things. But it's a hard job. I think the other side is that, and I write about this in the book, is that the most common behavior I see personally when I talk to people is that they're lonely. It is a lonely job to be the CEO of the company. And even if you're a set of founders and you trust each other, that is, that's so key for the success of the CEO. But ultimately, it is a lonely job, and it kind of needs to be. So you need to also be learning yourself to live with a lot of abstract things, not knowing, still needing to take decision, and having shoulders, heavy stuff on your shoulders, right? And in the beginning, everything might be fun, and I'm not saying easy, but once you start building an audience and you have a revenue coming in, you might have investors, you might even be a public company. The burden on your shoulders increases, so you need to surround yourself with people that could be, as everyone says, honest with you, truthful with you, and have someone to talk to. And usually I'm a person that people come to talk to because I'm nobody in their organization. I'm not part of anywhere. They just need someone to talk to reflect on things. And it's usually driven by, I have so much stuff on my shoulders, and I need someone to talk about it, right? I mean, we should have more psychology into the industry where people, and so the CEO forums are great because then they can share experience, people understand, but just sounding boards, so important.
So that's also like one of the solution or course of action that are mentioned in the book, because it's just not highlighting where are the challenges, but also suggesting some solutions that some companies have done. And I think there was mention of also trends I've seen, like having co-CEOs, assigning yourself a coach or going for counseling sometimes, and the sounding boards.
Exactly.
Because the responsibility doesn't change nevertheless, but it's a huge task for just one person to handle.
Yes.
And sometimes you end up doing so, talking to also a lot of founders through the podcast and private conversation. Some they just happen to be in the role, but in their heart they just don't want to be in that role. And this is where, at the end of the day, it's still damaging for the organization because it needs someone to take that responsibility.
For sure. And also, all the shit always go upwards, right? It is true. So what the hardest thing should and usually always ends up on the CEO plate, right? So if you're a bigger company, the board would push stuff on you and the rest of the organization would, underneath. And it's kind of the way it works. And then at that moment, you need to be able to deal with some of this pain that comes, right? And you need to be surrounded by people who can be there to support you and then help you. Just again, the sounding board. But in the end, you need to be good to deal with all the shit that comes your way. And usually you're required to take decision that is very painful. Right? There is rarely any, here's a solution that works everywhere. There's always a set of pain, and it needs to be distributed in some way, unfortunately. Right? Things are easy in good times and very hard in bad times. I think right now there's a lot of CEOs there who feels this pressure.
And that I've seen the challenge through my coaching practice, that it's a lot of self-leadership, like learning, finding the resources inside you to deal with expectation, responsibilities, and at the end of the day, you have those days where you have your emotions, you just want to let go, but you're not just a random person who have a bad day, like letting go one day, then sleep the next day has consequences in an organization. And this is the hardest part I find with a role. It takes strength, mental strength, psychological strength, and going through that journey of making hard decisions, displeasing others, sometimes even are you aligned still with yourself? What is the truth in you? And it's also a conversation that you need to have if you can, so many layers of psychology of it.
For sure. And just to go back to the previous conversation, is that once people, if you have an organization, few or many, if they start to feel that you as CEO are starting to break the promises you made, right? It doesn't really matter what the promises was, but if you start to change your narrative and you start to do things where they go, hold on, this isn't really what we agreed on. And things are changing, but I think I'll go back to Ilke. I think this is one of his key strengths, is that he can be very consistent on the change he wants and looks for, and he can refer to, here's the promise I made, here's what we said we would do. Then this happened, and we looked at it, and now we decided we're going to do these changes because of these reasons. And yes, some will be good, some will be bad, and here's how we're going to do it next, right? And people get, I might not agree, but I understand. And I think when you are in a very stressful position, you start to take a lot of decisions and you start breaking a lot of promises. And I think that's where, to go back to culture. So I have the most stupid advice for some people, because it's so obvious, but it's so hard to actually do. It's take days off, sleep more, exercise, eat healthy. It's like this stuff, right? Which is like, I almost feel old when I say it. But what I do is I tell people, like, you don't need to be at the office every day. You can block a whole day in your calendar and not be at the office. It's completely okay. Because it's the exhaustion that gets to people over time, and that's where you start doing the wrong decisions, right? So whatever profile you are, make sure you're in your best physical and mental strength, especially in these times, right? So it's okay. Take that extra day. Take the time. Go, do these things that any coach out of the industry would say 100 times off, that any book would scientifically prove that you should be doing, that we always feel in stressful situations that we don't have time for.
Yeah.
And then things go wrong.
Yeah, it's the quality of also decisions you have to make, because that's the main thing you have to do, right? So clarity, quality of your decision and output. So CEO is not about what you do, like the time you work, it's about the output and the outcome of what you do, and the quality of that depends a lot back to the basics.
Yeah.
Health, mental health, sleep.
In the end, it's the responsibilities to the people in the teams, right? All the employees and owners and all of that. But I rather have a CEO or a leader on top level to take very few high quality decisions that are thought through, that you can clearly hear that there's a narrative and there's a rationale and there's a thought process and there's a connection to it, rather than start shooting all over the place, right? Then it's more like stop. If you're going to run fast in random directions, just stop, right? And then stand still for a while, take a day off, talk to people, think about what it means, go back, try to attack it from a number of angles, and then go again.
A reminder, I can relate a lot to that. As we touch a bit on the CEO, like we can talk so much about it, and I think that's where we have met in that journey of leadership, and it's helping also for this conversation, right? So for people in the journey to do the counterintuitive thing by doing less, but the impact of more. One topic I wanted to go to, which has been a challenge, especially in conversation of coaching I've had, co-founders team. And there's an analogy so in others, I think it was Joachim writing about it, magical pairs, and you call it grumpy old couple. And I've seen that. I've been also part of teams where I have been like in a good duo. And could you elaborate more a bit around like that pair and what you've seen, working well in co-founders team?
So I bet, you and like many other people, there's older relatives that have been married for 50 years. And you could look at them and they always it always looks like they're a bit disrespectful with each other. Like they're sneezing at each other. There's like a bit of a nagging. And actually, when you start to listen, you don't really hear what they're saying. They're just somehow building on each other's sentences. And it sounds pretty harsh in many cases. And I've learned throughout the years is that, even my own family, is that if you start listening to what's really happening, not specifically the word, it could actually be that should we have coffee? Yeah, and it's like, I always have coffee at 3. Well, you know that, right? I'll do coffee. You want some cookie? Yeah, I want cookie. But it just, what they've done is that when you've been married and together for so long, you just remove all the disclaimers, all that, are you sure you want to really? It's like, just get to the point, right? And it just means that you're so comfortable. I'm not saying people should be nagging with each other, but in the best scenarios, you're so comfortable with each other and you trust each other so completely and you understand each other so much, so deep. You remove 90% of the vocabulary. It's like, I know we were going to have coffee at 3. I just need to say that same word. It might not even be the word coffee, but the other person goes, right? And then it's like, and then someone does coffee, and if you're looking there going, what's going on? So I've studied this at game companies, right? And it's usually, on the more on the creative side, and there's a product business, operational, I call it a marriage, right? And the best of them who's been together for a very long time, they're in constant conflict, right? There's a constant challenge. They don't talk about the nice fluffy things. They only attack the very critical thing at all given time, right? So in environments, other people can be afraid of these two because it looks like they're constantly arguing, but they're negotiating. They're very quickly getting to a point where they can decide on something because they know each other so well, right? It's an enormous longing. So that's why I call it the grumpy old couple, because it's usually two people, and from the outside it looks like they're in conflict and fighting, but they're in problem-solving mode very efficiently, right? And obviously, they should be friendly and kind and nice to each other, which it's a loving thing, right?
And what is behind, touching also on another topic, that complementary of a co-founders team, right? So this is where it's the way I look at it, like having done hiring of teams and co-founders, like the complementary is really key. And this is where, when you are representing a different point of view, there's value in debating, sparring, because you make progress together instead of staying in your position.
Exactly.
And I think like the main point of tension I see that is necessary, especially in games, it's the, you touch on it as well, it's the creative and the business side, right? And I would like maybe like if you could elaborate more on that part, like what are also the challenges in the industry where maybe an imbalance. I've seen some phases I see an imbalance in the creative side, maybe where if you go more indie, for example, completely creative. I've talked to teams and no business, not thinking about it, and then like let's see tomorrow. And then there's, one can say, so I see a lot more of that in mobile games, where it's very explicit. You perform or you don't, and very business oriented, maybe at the cost of creative. So where have you seen like some good balance of it, and if even you have examples, and how it's necessary to have both, to have commercial and the creative part?
So I think the very simple answer is that most of the most successful game companies in the world, you can always find a grumpy old couple. You'll find them. And you'll find that maybe not at a very specific moment, but over time, there's a balance between these two people, these two roles, which has this alignment and ability to actually negotiate and be in conflict efficiently all the time. And you can pick, any of the most, I'll just go back to my old, both Paradox and King had specifically these two people very clearly, and you can go to Rockstar, you'll find it, Supercell has it too, right? And larger organizations aim to have these two people, or Supercell again, right? They try to form teams around these two people, at least they used to, right? So to build, because you need a creative and a business aspect, and you need these two people to be very tight and to be very, very fast in decision making. So to co-found a studio, you need to be certain that you have these two competences in these two types of roles, whatever you call them, right? The CEO can be the creative, and there could be a CTI. It doesn't really matter. You need to have these types of abilities, where one is more focused towards the creative side and one on the operational business or whatever. And you need to understand each other, and you need to build on each other on a very detailed level. So I look for this when I look at companies, big, small, founding companies, to see can the two people, and then obviously they're surrounded by also very important people, but it tends to go back to understanding the business and the product and the market and marketing, and a kind of proven ability to build an experience that players wants to be part of. Technology is super important, but if you don't have these two, then you're a tech company, and sure, you can do that, right? If that's what you want to do. So it's very important to have the other people around, but you need to have these two in its core. So any game company at any given phase, and obviously it's when you found the company where you set this. So it's so important that you find these competences and personalities who can mix and be very grumpy old couple over time, right? Because it takes time. People are married for 50 years. There's a reason they get to that point. Because they spend a lot of time together.
It's a good reminder to respect those craft and fields perspective, that to always stay in tension, because it's like a yin and yang. You can't like build a successful game company without one or the other, right?
Exactly.
Like thinking of examples when it's too creative or it's too business driven, because at the end of the day, it's a game is a form of art still, but it needs a commercial to survive.
Exactly. And also, different phases of a company might lean stronger on one side than the other. And that's fine. Maybe you're a company with 5 different teams. Maybe the creative side is focusing more on the new games, and maybe the business-minded person is spending more time on the live ops games. These things are completely fine. You can organize in whatever you want, but in the end, it's about having a set of people, and beyond the two, that can manage conflict extremely efficiently and take decisions in such way, it's good for the company, and challenge each other and hold each other accountable for the actions and all these things. So if you don't build that trust, which is so hard, it will eventually probably fall apart, right?
Yeah. And it's back to important piece, which are co-founders, team composition, who you choose to be with, and ways of working, really ingrained in the culture. How do you spar? How do you disagree? How do you have conflicts, right?
Yeah.
And it's at this point, it's not even explicit, it's in the people, right? So this is where it's being a test, like, can you disagree to have a good outcome?
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's where I've seen really inspiring and persistent culture, where that creative tension is part of a, I would say, at the heart of a culture, without making the whole structure explode,
Yeah.
which is one of the main challenges. But it's back to what I see was how, like, the leadership, who are like leading the company, how do they behave?
Yeah.
So then that same behavior is mimic in like in the teams, like that tension can exist and it's safe to happen.
Yeah.
So it's like so many layers of it, where as a result, this is the co-founder team, but it touches on all the, the elements of what makes a company, cultures, way of working.
I just need to say, in the book I call it peel the onion. Right?
Yes.
Because it's layers, and I think about it as a relationship. Whenever someone meets who doesn't know each other, there's just all the layers is there. And if you want to build a deep, great relationship, you kind of need to peel layer by layer into the core. You can't really shortcut it. You just need to go layer by layer. And that takes time. And for every new person you put into it, there's a peeling the onion kind of approach that needs to be done.
Totally.
And if you only stay on shallow topics, you never peel the onion, right? So conflict is a good thing if you know how to manage it and do it, because it requires people to expose themselves and go through tougher things. But that's also when you build relationship.
Yeah. And that reminds me, for how do you see a team doing? It's in the worst times, how they handle it. It's a real test, actually, even when things are going right.
Yeah.
This is where you see the true colors of the team and the personalities.
I had a breakfast with Emily from Superbloom this morning. They do so amazing stuff, and we talked about this. And I mentioned that from what I've learned is that, to build a relationship, it actually boils down to a set of things. One is frequency, like how often do we meet? Because there's so many things we pick up by knowing each other and talking to each other and just learning about each other. But if we only spend time and only talk about weather or whatever the sport thing, we stay shallow, right? Don't get to a deep, meaningful. And the other thing is actually, conflict, and conflict as in not as we argue and fight, but we go through challenging things. It could be we against the world. We go through, as you said, tougher times. That's where we form these, because it creates meaning for us, and we do it together. So go through tough times together is one of those things that builds deeper relationships. And I think, again, up, down, up. I think it's the downside and the ones who's there and who's been through it. I think that's where the relationships are built.
Totally.
Right? And then you go up again, and that's where you build the true. That's where I think the second curve can be so much bigger. It's one of the components, at least.
Yeah, in the stages of forming a team, the storming, what you said, like going down, is the key stage of forming a team, actually. This is where a team is really formed, not, again, during good times. And I've experienced it as well, building a studio, where at the time after the storming, the most uncomfortable, where we feel we will all break up and, we will not talk to each other the day after. If we can overcome this is beautiful, because this is where you can really trust, like, we have survived this. We've seen the ugliest part of ourselves, and then, but in a safe way where nobody left. So
remember, we talked about this a long time ago when you wanted to do more advising and consulting. And remember, I told you, like, one of the first thing I do when I start to talk to new companies is that I specifically seek out the elephant in the room, and I put my finger on it, and I can see it. It's usually painful when you start to point to things, because they know that it's a bad thing that they haven't really dealt with, hence the elephant in the room. And then I push a little harder, and it always causes some friction and irritation. And I don't push too hard, but I push a bit, and I just don't let go. It's like I just point to it over and over again, and it causes irritation. And then I say, well, it's not my company. It's not for me. I'm just saying it's there. You know it's there. I'm just saying you're not doing anything with it.
Yeah.
And it causes a bit like annoying. So almost everyone comes back a week later going, you know what? I thought about what you were saying, and maybe we should, right? But it is about peeling the onion.
Yeah.
Immediately, I can go a few steps down,
Yeah.
a lot quicker, and it also creates a level of respect for each other, a level of credibility. I'm pointing to something, and I'm not giving up. I'm just saying, if you want to do this, you have to. I'll be there for you.
Yeah.
It would be part of my job. But I'm not going to sit there and pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I'm going to point to it, and I'm going to hold you to it. But it caused pain. But the next week, suddenly we talk to each other on a deeper level. So,
Peeling the onion, exactly.
Peeling the onion,
Yeah.
right.
That's great when you have exactly, as a practice, someone external to painfully to point you to your own things that you may know or may not know. And in some cases as well, when the co-founder team as well is, I would say, mature, aware enough to point out themselves. This is the hardest part.
Exactly. And that's where you wanted the co-founding team to be. Let's just go back to the Grand Prix Cup, and it goes back to the ability to be in conflict, but in a very good way, right? Because then you can challenge each other. And that's where people talk about accountability. That's the thing.
Yeah.
There you go, right? When you get to that point. But then again, as any team, let's say you're three people in a team, and then you add a fourth one. All that gets reset, right? And then you have to teach the fourth person, and then that person will go through the same levels again, right?
Yeah.
And then, a month later, you add a fifth person, and you have to go through it again, right? It can be very devastating for the team when they build this up over and over again. Right?
And being cautious about the people you have to add over time. I have a last question. One analogy I really liked around 4 phases is looking at the company like a human being growing up, right? Like infancy stage, teenager, like a bit erratic, and then growing up, maturing and declining and aging. And one part that is at the end of the book that really also stayed with me really as good reflection question for a CEO. There, you can be a good CEO at different phases, and one that I found the most challenging is when you have hit success, and then having that conversation. I think you have some reflection question: is this still the company you want to be part of? And when you know that you have to go and repeat again, and it's not of interest for you, and like the painful conversation, the dialogue you should have, like, are you still the right one to continue the phase to, well, either fix the decline or not get into the decline, so you keep repeating the growth. So as a question to you, maybe reminding those questions are, and maybe some practices you've seen where actually CEOs take themselves out, or some co-founders, or actually challenges and blockers that listeners can think of, like why they're not doing it.
I've been through, as an advisor, I've been through companies where the CEO wasn't the right person for that company in that stage. And part of the job, unfortunately, became to highlight to that person that you're probably not the one who should lead this company anymore. And it doesn't need to be a bad thing. I think the basic nature of humans is that you're good at certain things. Like, you're naturally good, and you can build skill on everything. But the different phases, you're like, first of all, you might enjoy a phase. Someone might enjoy the decline phase tremendously, right? And also might be very skillful at it. Great, that's awesome, right? So you have to first understand, where are you actually good at? It's not the same thing to be good at it because you enjoy it. You can actually be amazing in something and dislike it, right? So you can still do it. And then I think the second thing is just to, as a leader, to grow with the company's needs. And I think this is the hardest part, to understand that maybe you enjoy building the product, maybe you enjoy launching it, maybe that's amazing and fun, but suddenly everything is flatlining and you sit and suddenly profit like days right now. It's different type of leadership. And if it's your company and you're the CEO or whoever, you need to transform with the company.
Yeah.
It's very hard. And it's also, in my head, it can be completely fine to acknowledge that I'm actually bad at this. This is weakness. I'm a risk for this company where it is, even if it's my company, and figure out how to solve it. Right? Yeah, tremendously hard.
Yeah. And I think, like, for the challenges of building a company that survive over time, repeating success, there's just the human component of the person that has to take the role of a CEO. You face over time, just those emotions, different motivations of life, and having the hard conversation that you are redundant, right? And no one's, and back to ego, no one's like to tell that to themselves, like, I'm just not the right person. So it takes a lot of maturity, actually, and confidence in yourself, like, I'm still a good person, but I'm just not the right person for that role, and to extract yourself.
I think to add on top of this, I think people talk about mission and vision and all the things they want to do, and I talk about it in the book, but I think one thing I tend to ask people is like, why is this so important for you? Like, whatever you do, whatever role you have, why is this important for you? What is your purpose here? And it's a very hard question, but if you have a good understanding on why you do what you do in a company, whatever position, you can always go back to that in good times and bad times. Like, I'm here because I believe in something and I get that here. And now there's bad times, but I still believe in this thing. And I believe that, or I believe in a person, or I believe in something. So it's extremely helpful. And also if you've been tremendously successful and you have all the money and everyone's like, great, you might feel an emptiness. But if you remember your purpose, you're like, why you did this, and can stay with it, and that's still true, I think I've seen it helps enormously for the most successful, because they get pretty empty and lonely once they achieve their topic. In the same way as things go really bad. Why are we doing this? And I think that's true for any role, junior, to the CEO, wherever in the world you are, whoever you are. And that's something you have to discover.
Most profound question for anyone.
And probably one of the hardest.
So that was some bits of the book today we touched on, but the depth of it is, of course, by reading the book. Thanks a lot for the time and overcoming like some resistance to be here today. And thanks so much for all the work you've done to put together that wisdom. It will help a lot of current founders, future founders, and even for my own personal interest, a lot as well. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. See you. Have a great day.